and more than 3,000 had been, at least more than 3,000 had been. Who can accept this? In Jenin alone, more than 600 had been killed, beside the injured persons. This is the most important thing. For this, we are asking for the committee, which had been accepted and established in the Security Council, to come very soon to follow up these crimes. And we are in need at the same time, which is very important, international forces. In south of Lebanon, there is international forces. In Golan Heights in Syria, there is international forces. In Sinai, international by the Americans. Why not here, international forces? What is the meaning of that?
Would you welcome the Americans?
With pleasure. This is my special talks with President Clinton in Camp David. We are appreciating as in Sinai, headed by the international forces, headed by the Americans. This is what I had mentioned it clearly and obviously to President Clinton in Camp David, in front of Barack. And I am repeating it again.
All right, we'll have the bulk of the interview, part 2 of the interview with Yasser Arafat, right after this very short commercial break, and then equal time to former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for his response. And then we've got a packed show, a lot of very interesting people. Stay tuned. This is War Zone. We'll be back live from Bethlehem right after this. Before we go back to the interview with Chairman Arafat, I just want to again give you the heads up. It is already Sunday here in the Holy Land. Today is Orthodox Easter, celebrated by hundreds of millions of Orthodox Christians around the world. It is widely expected that the Church of the Nativity standoff will be resolved sometime later today. And certainly Fox News will keep you abreast of every breaking development. Now back to Yasser Arafat. You know, in this interview, in this segment of the interview, we talk about a lost opportunity. Remember the Ehud Barak deal negotiated during the waning days of Bill Clinton's administration? I started the interview right there asking the Palestinian chairman if indeed that opportunity was lost, and would he take that deal if it was offered today. Here's Yasser Arafat.
Mr. President, if it was offered tonight, would you accept the Barak-Clinton deal right now?
You have to remember, we had arrived to a very important close points together in Taba. The conclusion was very important, which we had arrived in Taba negotiations, and this was declared by the two heads of our delegation and their delegation. And this had been established on President Clinton initiative, and also what had been offered by Barak.
Mr. President, is this yes, you would accept it, or yes, you would be close to accepting it?
Close to accept it, because as we had agreed upon in Taba, after the election, we will have a meeting to close it completely. And we, but you followed what had been done in the election.
But can we go back to that point? Can we go back to the point where peace is possible?
There is a way. And not to forget that the majority of the Israeli people are with the peace of the brave, which I had signed with my partner Rabin, who had lost his life from these fanatic groups in Israel.
Would the majority of the Palestinian people also agree?
You know that. Not only the majority of the Palestinian people, all the Arab countries. The initiative which had been declared in the, by Crown Prince Abdullah, which had been adopted by the Arab Summit Conference, took place in Arab Summit Conference in Beirut. What was the response of the Israeli? This war against the Palestinians?
But Mr. President, you know how I feel about
these
you.
crimes?
You know how I feel about you and the Palestinian people, but the same night, and I was in Beirut, and I felt so optimistic, the same night they said, we recognize Israel if Israel recognizes Palestine, that awful Passover massacre happened.
We are against all these terrorist activities, against the Palestinians, but against also the Israelis. From the beginning. Why I had signed the Peace of the Brave with my partner Rabin, and how everything was going smoothly during his life.
I walk the streets with you today, and I know the Palestinian people love you. Now, even more than even before when they still love you then. Now you can take control of all of this. Now you can keep the peace on this side. If you keep the peace on this side, then let the other side be the aggressor, not this side.
That we had accepted all the peaceful initiatives. And also, me, by myself, according to the approval of our Palestinian leadership, the cabinet, and the executive committee of the PLO, we had declared many times our peaceful initiatives. You remember it?
I do. Will you declare it tonight?
Even during...
Will you declare it tonight, Mr.
Yes. Even during the aggression against us, we continued repeating our slogans concerning our approval for the peace of the brave.
I have a new slogan. This will be, I don't want to take too much time. Palestine is not Israel, and Israel is not Palestine. Would you agree to that? Two separate states with the guarantee.
This is what I had signed with my partner Rabin. Did you forget this?
I have not.
This is what I was discussing in Y River with Netanyahu and Sharon. This is what I was discussing it in Camp David with Barak. This is what I had discussed in Sharm el-Sheikh, in the presence of the Europeans, of the United Nations, in the presence of President Clinton, King Abdullah, and President Mubarak. You forgot this?
I don't forget.
And before that, in Paris, in the presence of President Chirac. And you are forgetting that the meeting took place now in Washington with the Europeans, with the Russians, with the Americans, with the United Nations, and President Bush declared now that he will participate with this meeting.
I don't forget.
And this had been accepted also.
Just say
in the United Nations.
No more, no more. Even if you love Palestine, don't do this suicide bombing, don't do this terrorism. Say that now. Say that now. No, of course not.
I am doing it?
Say, no, of course not. But say this to the people. Say this to the young who might be misguided.
But before this...
I understand.
Before this,
say it now.
You have to understand, and to everybody to understand.
President, you know I understand.
That these crimes...
You know I understand.
This
I understand
annihilation...
I saw it with my eyes.
This huge
But I saw it with my
crimes.
eyes. Now say it to the children. Now say it to the children. Say it for our children.
No occupation, no any crimes against civilians, Palestinians and Israelis, for our children and for their children to live together peacefully in the land of peace in the Terra Santa.
As you can imagine, our next guest is very eager to have his equal time and his response. Coming up next, the man many believe will be the next Prime Minister of Israel, the former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Stay tuned. He got 9 minutes, and now the once and probably future Prime Minister of Israel gets 9 minutes. Welcome Benjamin Netanyahu to the program. He joins us from Los Angeles. Mr. Prime Minister, your general response to a man you once negotiated face-to-face with, and the odds are you'll be doing it again.
Well, first of all, I have to say that I hope the press stopped fawning over this mass killer, and I don't think you should be pleading with him. I don't know when I watch Arafat whether we're seeing entertainment or news, because it's very hard to take anything this man says seriously. This is a man who calls in Arabic for 1 million suicide bombers on tape, and you have those tapes. And here he can say that he wants peace, and he doesn't commission suicide bombers. This is a man who's just engineered the other day a fake funeral in order to increase the numbers supposedly massacred in Jenin. The problem was the bearers slipped the stretcher and the corpse started to run away. They forgot to tell the martyr that he's dead. This is a man who is not updated by the fact that there are not 500 casualties. He pumps the numbers up by 2 orders of magnitude because he's not just updated on the last line of Palestinian propaganda. So it's impossible to take him seriously. It's impossible to believe a word he says or to believe that he'll honor any commitment that he makes. He never has, and I'm afraid he's not going to. So my slogan, you asked him about slogans, my slogan is a simple one. Arafat must go if we're going to have any progress towards peace and any end to terror. It's just not going to happen with this man around. He's a dysfunctional terrorist leader.
Are you saying, Mr. Prime Minister, that it's impossible that Israel should not negotiate with Yasser Arafat, even though he is the elected leader of the Palestinian people?
First of all, he's not the elected leader. He wasn't elected in legitimate elections because in those elections he controlled 100% of the press, and any serious challenger knew that he would be kneecapped if he was lucky and killed if he was unlucky. So nobody really challenged him. Some free election. But let's suppose he had free election. Hell, Hitler was freely elected. So what? He established, as soon as he got in, a totalitarian dictatorship, suspended democracy, instituted a culture, a cult of death. That's exactly what Arafat did. Not being freely elected, he did exactly that. And I think it's the policy that he pursues, the poisoning of an entire generation, taking 14-year-olds and 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds in his suicide kindergarten camps and teaching them self-immolation. I saw something that I hope you'll show on one of your future shows. I saw a tape of an interview with a 14-year-old Palestinian child sitting with his 2 younger brothers, and he was describing how another friend of his, also 14-year-old, was being inculcated, both of them, by the Palestinian school system to commit suicide. And he said to his friend, you know, we're young, we should live. But the other boy actually blew himself up, and here he was standing, sitting with his 2 brothers, crying out, we're alive, we're alive. Arafat sends these boys to die, and then he gives these idiotic statements that he just gave now. He's not worthy and not
Let me be very... Okay, here's very specifically, Arafat calls for an international force to be inserted between the Israelis and the Palestinians in much the same way they are in Sinai, in the Golan, or in Lebanon. Would you, if you were Prime Minister now, allow or approve of an American force to be inserted between the Palestinians and the Israelis?
Well, we had an American force in Beirut, and Arafat and his allies had his allies basically bombed him. I mean, he loved to see American body.
Well, that was Hezbollah. That's... all of the evidence points to Hezbollah,
I didn't say that Arafat
Iran
did it. His allies did it.
Others.
Yeah, and they were in alliance with Arafat. Where did Arafat get his ship full of explosives? From his buddies in Iran.
What about an international force?
I think that international
forces... What about the Sinai formula?
I think it's totally different. Sadat wanted a genuine peace, talked peace in Arabic to his people, truly prepared and detoxified Egyptian society. Arafat is doing the opposite. We don't have here an Egyptian Sadat. We don't have here a Jordanian King Hussein. We have here a Palestinian King Hussein. He has poisoned an entire generation, and what we need to do is what you do when you're faced with such totalitarian regimes, you throw out this dictator, and you begin to detoxify the society. That's what you did with Nazi Germany. That's what you did with Imperial Japan. You not only defeated them and removed these leaders from the scene, you also established a more open and pluralistic society that would allow the non-Arafats and the Palestinian society to come forward.
Is President Bush so off base when he calls for the creation of two separate states, when he calls for negotiations, when he gets together with the Europeans, the Russians, the United Nations, and makes this this quadruple alliance for peace? Is he so misguided? Doesn't he know what you know, Bibi?
I think the president his intentions are first rate. He wants the best for Israel. I have no doubt of that, and I know he's not going to ram down an agreement down our throats, and I know he's not going to have any kind of an imposed settlement. But I think what he's trying to do right now is to bypass Arafat. He might think that in this or that context of an international conference, he'll bypass him, but I'm afraid that's not going to work, because Arafat is going to call the shots. Arafat's going to have his guy there. He's the dictator. He kills anybody who opposes him, and he is going to have this entire conference line up with him as the lowest common denominator. So it's not going to work, I'm afraid. I think the only thing that will work, and we have to face up to this bleak truth, is that when you're faced with someone as irrational, as murderous, as toxifying a leader and a regime as Arafat, the only thing you can do is to get rid of the regime and thereby signal to the next leadership of the Palestinians, you will not pursue a terror war, because otherwise they'll just go back and do it. He's back to square one. He's now hailed as a hero.
Are you suggesting that
he'll continue this?
But are you suggesting, Mr. Prime Minister, that he be exiled or assassinated? I'm not sure.
No, I'm suggesting that we expel him. I've suggested it from the start, that we expel him, that we have a line of separation. I don't think Palestinian society is ready yet to form an agreement. This is 10 years of steady inculcation of hatred that Arafat does in the textbooks, in the media, teaching young kids that they have to blow themselves up and kill as many Israelis as possible. It'll take a few years to overcome this. And by the way, it has been shown, as I have said, in Germany and Japan, that it is possible to detoxify societies unless you believe that Muslims are incapable of moderating themselves. Well, the example of Turkey, for example, proves otherwise. I think we have to change the nature of this relationship, and it cannot change as long as Arafat, with his continuous drive to destroy Israel, a drive, by the way, that on Palestinian television, which he controls, he says day in, day out to the Palestinians, even as we speak, our goal is not peace with Israel, but destruction of Israel. He said to you, there is a will and there is a way. His will is to destroy Israel. His way is terror. Both have to disappear for peace to begin.
What about the occupation of the territories? Under a future Netanyahu regime, would there be a move toward giving the territories back to the Palestinians?
First of all, the Palestinians are self-governing. All of them are governed by Arafat, for better or worse, for worse. I'm not suggesting that we govern them, but they're governed by Palestinians. Secondly, these territories are not occupied. Resolution 242 doesn't say that Israel has to withdraw to every last inch. It says there has to be a compromise over these disputed territories from which Israel was attacked time and again. So that could be worked out in a future political settlement, but not with Arafat, who doesn't want the West Bank. He wants Tel Aviv.
Would you take the Ehud Barak deal now if Arafat did? Quickly, 20 seconds.
I wouldn't, and the Israeli people rejected it overwhelmingly when they elected Ariel Sharon. And the reason they did so is not because they don't want peace, but they know that peace is impossible with an Israel 10 miles wide and Arafat sitting in a Palestinian terrorist state above the hills on Tel Aviv, overlooking Tel Aviv. That's not going to produce peace. Get rid of Arafat and start a genuine political process with genuine peace
gotta go.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, thanks for giving us equal time, certainly the other point of view. All right, we'll take a break, ladies and gentlemen. The program continues. Warzone, live from Bethlehem, right after this. Stay tuned.
Well, when we return, we have some breaking news to update you on from Israel. The Israeli government of Prime Minister Sharon has just released documents it says proves conclusively that the Palestinian Authority President Yasser Arafat is involved in terror. We'll be talking live to an Israeli and a Palestinian official when Late Edition returns. Stay with us.
This is CNN.
Welcome back to Late Edition. We're following a breaking news story. The Israeli government of Prime Minister Sharon has just released a 100-page document outlining what it says is conclusive evidence that the Palestinian Authority President Yasser Arafat has direct links, is deeply involved in acts of terrorism, including suicide bombings. Joining us now is a representative of the Israeli government. Danny Naveh joins us from Tel Aviv. Mr. Naveh, thanks for joining us. What is the main so-called smoking gun piece of evidence that you have?
We have clear-cut hard evidence that Arafat and his close aides were involved directly in terrorist activities. They authorized the activities, they financed the activities, and they were involved directly in planning them. We have found during our last military operation lots of documents that really are hard evidence that prove that Arafat directly was involved. Arafat served in many ways as the high commander of the Al-Aqsa brigades. And all the terrorist activities of the Fatah, of the Al-Aqsa brigades, killing so many innocent Israelis, were under the instructions and the authority of Yasser Arafat himself.
Give us one hard piece of evidence, one example that makes this point.
Yeah, for example, we have found documents signed by Arafat himself authorizing the payment to Fatah terrorists. He was asked by Marwan Barghouti, the commander of the Fatah, and by other terrorists of the Fatah to allocate on a regular basis sums of money to terrorists of the Fatah. And we have found documents signed by Arafat himself authorizing them to move ahead with these kind of activities. And even more so, Arafat's closest aide, Tawfiq Tirawi, the commander of what they call general intelligence, was the one that, with Arafat authorization, coordinated between all the terrorist groups, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and Fatah, and was directly involved in their planning of terrorist activities.
This document, I take it, has not yet been formally provided to the U.S. government. I just spoke with Condoleezza Rice. She says she hasn't seen it yet. Will you be making it available to the Bush administration directly?
Of course. Our Prime Minister, Mr. Sharon, as you know, is on the way to Washington right now, and he has a report with him. He has representatives of our intelligence on board as well. And I'm sure that it is highly important from our point of view, of course, to brief the U.S. administration, to brief members of Congress and other officials on the intelligence that we have, because all these pieces of information are based on intelligence that we allocated through the Israeli operation. And unfortunately, with your permission, Wolf, we also have found and allocated documents that prove that a few of the Arab countries, like the Saudis, Syria, Iraq, and other elements in the Arab world that also assisted the Palestinian Authority in moving ahead with this terror campaign.
So what is your bottom line when the Prime Minister meets with the President? Based on this information, this evidence that you say you have, will you ask the Bush administration to stop its dealings with Yasser Arafat and the Palestinian Authority?
Whoever read this report, whoever see these hard evidence and crystal clear evidence about Arafat's involvement in terrorism, should come to the conclusion that there is no way to achieve peace as long as Arafat is in town. There is no way to move ahead as long as Arafat is trying to lead the Palestinians for further talks with Israel. Because if we look for a reality of peace, we can't achieve it with Arafat. If we look for virtual reality, this is a different story. The bottom line is, Wolf, that Arafat can't.
I was going to say, what is the alternative?
First of all, we have to acknowledge the fact that Arafat can't be partner for peace again. And it's up for the Palestinians to decide if they really want peace, if they are really interested in putting an end to the terror campaign, and if they are interested in reconciliation with the state of Israel, they have to decide. Because under Arafat, it's crystal clear that we can't achieve peace.
So what is the alternative, though, to Yasser Arafat? The Condoleezza Rice and the Secretary of State Colin Powell say that irrespective of what may have happened in the past, he is still the leader of the Palestinians and probably more popular today than he's ever been. Who do you want to negotiate with?
First of all, this is not up to us for the Israelis to decide who is going to lead the Palestinians. What we can do and what is to show, and to present the facts of those hard evidence that connect Arafat to terrorist activities, and it is up for the Palestinians to decide. We are really looking for partner for peace. We really wish that we will find one day, sooner the better, a partner for peace on the Palestinian side. Unfortunately, it is crystal clear that it can't be Arafat. Who is it going to be if it's not Arafat? It is up for the Palestinians to decide.
Finally, before I let you go, Mr. Naveh, the Palestinians already are suggesting these documents are forgeries, that the Israeli intelligence services are excellent in creating these kinds of forgeries, and they're not authentic. What do you say about that?
Well, I can only say, Wolf, that these documents are authentic. The Palestinians are really embarrassed by these kind of documents. For example, we have a document that they allocated vast sums of money every month from their budget to pay terrorists. $9 million out of their monthly budget that comes from the EU went to terrorist activities. So it is not a surprise for me that they would try to say that this is a fraud. And I invite everyone. I invite, the CIA or the MI5 or whoever would like to take a look at those documents and this intelligence to examine the facts and to come to the same conclusion that our intelligence services came to, which is that there are crystal clear evidence that connect Arafat to terrorist activities.
Danny Naveh, representative of the Israeli government, of Prime Minister Sharon, thanks for joining us from Tel Aviv. And let's get the Palestinian perspective. Right now, joining us is the chief Palestinian negotiator in the peace negotiations with Israel that obviously don't exist right now. Saeb Erekat joins us once again. Mr. Erekat, you've heard the Israelis. I don't know if you've had a chance to see this 100-page document, but what is your reaction to this?
Well, Wolf, my reaction to this is that yesterday the Israelis spoke about a story of a funeral in Jenin, which the body fell down, and turned out to be that somebody was shooting a film in Jenin. Today, in preparation for Sharon's visit to Washington and meeting with Bush, we began to see these forgeries, lies, and shams and stunts, documents. Today, I'll tell you about what's not documents. I will tell you about Fatma Zakarna, a 30-year-old mother, with her 4-year-old son Basil and her 2-year-old daughter Abir, who were murdered by the Israeli army, and we have not even heard that these soldiers were arrested. Tamer Abu Sariya, a child who was 7 years old in Tulkarem, was also murdered today. I believe the end game of the Israeli government from such stunts and shams is to destroy the Palestinian Authority, to discredit the Palestinian Authority, in order to say we want to make peace, but we don't have partners. That's the reason why.
Mr. Erekat, are you saying that the Israelis forged these documents that they're going to be presenting, that they've made public in Israel today, but they're going to be presenting to the Bush administration in the coming days?
Well, look, Wolf, it's very obvious that these are forgeries. Israel now is my foe, my judge, my jury, distributing these leaflets. I don't think anybody will hear about them because they have a Congress in the United States that will adopt these papers without even reading them. They want to have the Congress and the Senate is usually ganging us against us. I believe that the real focus should be on the Palestinian people disastrous living conditions now under the Israeli military occupation. I believe the focus now should be the continuing killing fields of Palestinians out there. What do they try to do with these things, with these documents, with these forgeries? What is their next? What are they preparing for? What is their next homicide? What's their killing fields? Who will they attack more? Where will there be their tanks incursions next? Today, this morning, we saw tanks in the city of Tulkarem, in the refugee camp of Tulkarem. I believe the innocent Palestinians who are dying on the hour, every hour by the Israeli army are asking this question. These are not documents and papers. These are human bodies, flesh and blood, mothers and children that are being slaughtered. And then, if the Israelis care so much about the truth, and they call us all everything, liars, blood libel, they said about us, about the Jenin refugee camp, why did they refuse to receive the International Commission of Inquiry? What do they have to hide? And now we see the end game today of preparing the ground for Sharon's visit, another sets of lies and forgeries. We challenged them. I really wanted to be with Danny Nevev face-to-face so he can hear me and speak to me, and I could not even look him in the eyes because I'm confined to my hometown, Jericho. But today, what we heard, the Saudis also stand accused, the European Union stand accused, everybody who doesn't see it eye to eye with Israel is going to be standing accused, and Israel, this government is continuing with its settlement activities, reoccupation, destruction of the peace process, destructing of the Palestinian Authority. And I believe these documents are not authentic, are forgeries, are lies. They are out there to discredit the Palestinian Authority, and I think their end game is to prepare for either deporting President Arafat or killing him. And then now they're saying that they need partners to make peace with, but not Arafat. I think they just say the truth about their end game of destroying the Palestinian Authority and destroying President Arafat.
Mr. Arafat, you probably know that you've come under some widespread criticism here in the United States for initially charging that the Israelis were engaged in a massacre in Jenin, perhaps 500 Palestinians murdered in that massacre, you suggested, but now all of the evidence suggests that perhaps 53 or 56 Palestinians died in that fighting in Jenin. Do you want to use this opportunity to give us your assessment now, based on what you know? How many Palestinians were killed? Condoleezza Rice, only a few minutes ago on this program, said she didn't see any evidence of a so-called massacre.
It depends, first of all, on the number 500. I said 500, but I said at the same time I cannot confirm them because I didn't have the chance to go and pull the rubbles out and clean the rubble out, and I don't know exactly, and I said I cannot confirm it. But what defines a massacre? Israel called, when they had this bombing in the Netanya restaurant, 26 people, they called it a massacre. So what's a massacre? Anyway, the international community called what happened in Jenin refugee camp war crimes. There are war criminals. And we want this international commission to come, not because we want to charge people or anything, because we want to ensure that such things will not reoccur, because we continue to be wolf, a people with no army, no navy, no air force, at this disproportionate use of force against us, and with the Congress and Senate ganging on us to adopt everything that Israel says. And at the end of the day, I believe the highest form of terrorism and war crimes are being committed by the continuous Israeli occupation.
Saeb Erekat, we have to leave it right there. Thanks so much for joining us as usual.